So there's a whole bunch of different stories going on, different historical overlapping of. This is also interesting. Like the Bay Area, our main water supplies are going this direction, whereas the big story that we'll talk about today is water going this direction. They're crossing. There's plumbing crossing directions, which is kind of crazy. Okay, so here's the third picture. I showed you the rainfall, and we had the snowpack, and now we have how much is in the reservoirs. And for all of these, if you're interested, it's cool. You can go online. And so for all of those other two, the rainfall and snowpack, that's day by day. Like you can go and see the instantaneous shot of how much there is at any given point. So here's our, the biggest ones here are these ones, the biggest amount of water in the state, Lake Oroville and Lake Shasta being the two hugest ones. And here's our averages, and so we're at 40 to 50% of average in our reservoirs. There's a whole bunch of policy questions here. So we know it's a drought year and it's starting. And what do we do with this water? Like say you were the person who controlled the tap on the reservoir. How much of this you're going to let out this year? As I said, you have some calculation for how much water is going to flow into it. You can measure, you can look at that data for how much is in the snowpack above these reservoirs. So you can allocate a little bit. Down the bottom here, you can't actually drain reservoirs. This is an interesting thing. So you can't get to the bottom of the reservoir. It would cause a whole bunch of problems. So despite the fact that you have millions of acre feet in the reservoir, you can't go to the bottom of it. So you only get to use some middle chunk here. And we have this huge question, what if it's a drought next year? So this is the big management question that they're making allocations for this year's farming season, and they have to have something reserved for next year. So how do we figure out some sort of allocation of this, which leaves some for if there's one more drought year in a row. We have some ability to forecast El Nino, but it's very imprecise. Like right now, it's like 50% chance there's an El Nino next year, which would mean more than average rain, which would mean a chance to refill the reservoirs. But we don't have a precise way to measure what the amount that's going to rain next year. Anyway, so we have a reservoir. We have reservoir managers. We have thousands of acre feet being our scale that we're in. So these are all in millions of acre feet. And this, just to say, this is what's feeding the water project, the state and the federal water project, Lake Shasta being the top of the federal water project, Lake Oroville being the top of the state water project. So when we talk about how much water to send to farmers, this is the state's making the decision, this is the federal government making the decision. They put water, I'll explain more of this later, but they put water into the Sacramento River. It gets here to the Delta, where it's pumped out into the canals that go south to feed the agriculture down here and the cities down here. Oroville Dam. So, anybody ever been there? Chico, California. The tallest dam in the United States. 3.5 million acre feet could be stored there. This isn't this year's picture. This is some previous year picture. Right now, it's down. It's a lot lower. You see these crazy things where the dock's up here and the road goes way, way down the muddy bank. It also makes a huge amount of electricity, right? A really tall dam with millions of acre feet, a lot of electricity there. As we talked about before, you can only make the electricity when you release the water. So having a drought means we have less hydro this year. We have less hydro as part of our mix of energy. There's a really interesting story in Lake Oroville where there's this complicated, you let the water out of that big dam. This is the big dam I just showed you. You let the water out and it goes into these canals, and they basically have these these lakes that are called forebays and afterbays that are mini reservoirs. And between them, they have pumping plants. They're pumping generating plant. So they have a really amazing thing here called pumped water storage. So what they can do is use the reservoirs like a battery. They can, so say this is daytime. This is when we need water in the middle of the day, when we need electricity in the middle of the day, and this is where electricity is really cheap at night. So they can send the water out in the middle of the day, generating electricity where the price of electricity is really high, and then in the middle of the night, they can pump the electricity back uphill using the super cheap electricity. So when we have other power plants, we have nuclear power plants, we have some, the water getting let out of the top of the dam. We have big thermal plants that are operating 24 hours. They make electricity in the middle of the night that nobody's buying. We can use these reservoirs as batteries, and we can store electricity. This is a huge one for the future, thinking about how we're going to do renewables, how we're going to add more renewables into the grid. Being able to turn this on and off at will and have giant batteries this big are huge. And this this is happening in California. This is Oroville here, but they have big capacity to do it throughout the United States. And this is megawatts and megawatts and gigawatts of power. This is a really amazing way to not build more power plants, right? If you can figure this out, use dams that you have. This is in the California case, this is avoiding building nuclear power plants, right? They figured this out. We can store with the capacity we have and just smooth out the power generation that we have. So big story in California is moving the water from the north to the south, right? In the northern part of the state, it goes into the rivers. They use the conveyance of the Sacramento River and the Feather River to move the water. They're just manipulating the surface water that we already have. To go south, we have these big canals. And the canals are not the natural water course. You have a crazy thing here where you have the San Joaquin River that goes completely dry, going next to a canal lined with concrete that's using electricity to pump water in the opposite direction. There's different branches here. There's a branch that goes over to the coast. There's a branch that goes towards San Diego, gets to the northern part of San Diego. There's a set of reservoirs along Los Angeles. So what are some of the economic issues to get back to the economics? So one of the big ones is balancing between different users, balancing between the demand, the net benefits, the value added of different types of uses. The second is balancing year to year. So we have, we're borrowing from the future. We draw down that Shasta Dam. We're borrowing for our economic value this year against the economic value next year. Should we, allow people to keep farming rice and alfalfa that use tons of water this year so that, give up some opportunities for something in a future year? So the economic questions are how to allocate water between users and between time periods. All this in economics would come to a price of water, a price per acre foot, a price per cubic meter. But these prices are never seen by farmers. They're seen by the utilities and the water districts in how much money they have to spend to create additional water. But the price that people pay for water is almost always set not to reflect the actual price of creating water. So as I said about groundwater, there's an open access issue. There's an externality with open access. And so some of these can be measured, right? So if you have a groundwater basin that's going down, you can measure how much it costs to drill deeper to get more water, how much it costs in electricity to pump up higher. So if the water's close to the surface, you're using only so much electricity to pump the water out. As the water disappears down lower and lower, you're using more and more electricity to get that water out. So to some extent, we can measure these externalities in terms of the cost of the pumping. And we can say, in a given time period, if we overpump this year, this is the big story in groundwater, we're overpumping a little bit each year, but this is something that accumulates over time. So we would have some graph where we've overpumped a little bit for a long time, but we're imposing higher and higher costs on future pumping. So we're by going below this marginal user cost, we're imposing that cost on future time periods. So this is related to both the renewable and the non-renewable resource models. If you think about groundwater as a non-renewable model, we're mining this big store of groundwater, and we're using it up, we're getting down lower and lower to finish it off. If it's a renewable model, we're getting some rate of recharging it, and how much is our discount rate, our rate of impatience cause us to use more now, even though it's going to get renewed. The future profits are worth less to us than our profits now. This is a big story because in this drought, a ton of groundwater is going to get pumped. You know, on the margin, we're going to pump more groundwater and hope that it gets recharged. On the margin, that's where we have something to push on. So we talk about this in terms of the models we had for renewables, resources, static efficiency versus dynamic efficiency. So in static efficiency, we have the cost of pumping the groundwater plus this marginal user cost of imposing the externality on other users. So this is allocating groundwater between us and other people. We should have this externality price added to our price of using the water. This is where you need to have groundwater management districts to set this, or to set some scarcity of pumping that reflects this. Dynamic efficiency is needing to look like this model where we're going across time periods. So we need to manage the water so that we take into account our use in the next time period. If we just pull it out short-sightedly with a really high discount rate on future profits, we can ignore future time periods, but to the extent that we can set up a system that's going to smooth our use across time periods. An amazing thing that's, the push come to shove part of this year is the innovation of groundwater banking. So we have a lot of wells that have been overpumped. There's a lot of capacity in those wells. There's a lot of space in the groundwater reservoirs that's just sitting there. So there's just natural storage capacity. We already have pumps. They're already on top of these groundwater basins. We've already overpumped them. So we have this empty space that we can fill. And on years where there's a lot of water, or even on years when there's average amounts of water, we can decide to recharge groundwater. We can decide to put water into those groundwater reservoirs. And that's what's causing the ability to bank water between years, to trade water between years, and that's where water markets have started. There's rice growers in Sacramento Valley. They can decide whether to grow rice this year or let this water flow down the Sacramento River. They're going to say, let this water go to the user, and they're going to pump more water down to Bakersfield and Westlands Water District, where they're growing cotton, basically in a super dry area. Can be like, okay, we're going to take some of that water we bought, we're going to put it into the ground, and we're going to pull it out later when we need it at a much higher price. A lot of this groundwater banking, you can think about in terms of they can take low-cost water that they bought on a water market, or that they took a low-value use of the water and decided to not do it. Oh, we're not going to plant sugar beets on this acreage. We're going to put it in the groundwater bank so we can pull it out and sell it to the almond guys later. So the groundwater bank, there's different values of water at different time periods, different parts of the state, different years, and even just different months. It's allowing people to trade. Certainly in surface water, this is this issue of setting net benefits equal across users. So if we have a certain amount of surface water to allocate, if the State Water Project or Westlands Water District has a certain amount of water, almonds have a different marginal net benefit than alfalfa. And is there some way we can use these, the value product of water to set allocations across different uses? We can increase total net benefits if we change allocations. So there's places where it makes sense to grow rice, and there's places where it might make sense to grow alfalfa. But there's a lot of places it might not make sense. There's places where it makes sense to grow cotton. There's places where it probably doesn't make sense to grow cotton, given scarcity of water. So changing allocations get according to marginal net benefits. Problems with the current system. So basically the system's broken in a lot of ways. We don't have efficient management. There's a lot of political power behind the system and getting the water that people get right now for super cheap. But the system is based on a huge amount of infrastructure built by the federal government and giving away subsidies to farmers. Let's develop the West. Let's make billions of dollars worth of agriculture. It's paid off on a societal perspective. Value of agriculture in California is super high. But in terms of scarcity in a time of drought, in terms of allocation between users, it's not working. So this concept of use rights, use it or lose it, senior users versus lower users, all those behaviors don't encourage conservation. There needs to be change so that there's much more of an ability for people to maintain their use rights, even if they use less. Okay, I'm going to change crops. I'm going to use, do something that uses a lot less acre feet this year and put water back, not take as much water out of the system, but I'm not going to lose my ability to pull water out of the system. And then we have just the overall issue that agriculture has most of the use rights. Agriculture is 80%, and agriculture's use rights are senior to the urban use rights, right? So Los Angeles, San Diego want more water out of the state project. They are secondary. The people in Westlands Water District, their use is senior. The people growing cotton in the desert have senior water use rights to the urban rights. So it's not causing, it's not making for an equal negotiation over the water. The water prices that we do have are just completely out of whack. So the water prices have been set too low throughout the history of the system. The idea was subsidize and develop agriculture. There's, historical basis how much it costs to be. We don't have water prices that are reflecting accurately the demand curve for them or the marginal cost of creating them. We have some water markets. We have some ability with this groundwater banking to do trades, but transfers are very controlled. Water markets are a small amount. So, and transfers all have to go through this federal system and these local water agencies, so they have to be approved at many levels. And they don't, they're not just wide open, which would cause the price to more reflect either marginal cost or the demand. And then we have what's called declining block rate pricing, right? So this is where there's a price, and if you use a whole bunch, you get a lower rate. The more you use, the lower rates you get. So, a consumer is going to pay up here, a business is going to pay here, an industry is going to pay here, and a farmer is going to pay here. right? The more you use, the lower price you get in big blocks. And that just generally isn't a system that favors conservation or favors allocation of scarcity. We think that allocation of scarcity would be some increasing. The more you use, the price goes up. So what are some economic solutions? Better water markets, better water prices, make transfers possible, and this idea of eliminating use it or lose it. Have some way that people can hold rights even if they don't use it in a current year. So people could sell into a system without fearing that they wouldn't get an allocation in the future. Water pricing needs to happen for groundwater. There's no water pricing for groundwater other than this huge electricity cost. Block rate pricing could go up. So block rate pricing, some people get cheap water, bigger users increasing the blocks. You could have time period pricing. So using water in August would cost different than using water in November. So where there's months, there would be something where like the availability of water would face the scarcity in certain months. And a big one in California, as the urban grows, definitely San Joaquin growing, people can build the new subdivision and the new Walmart without necessarily guaranteeing long-term water supplies. So that's trying to put the scarcity of water into the value of land and the value of development. A big one that we're talking about right now in the drought. So right now we're deciding whether to go against our environmental regulations that guarantee some amount of water to the salmon. And the San Joaquin growers are super organized, and Dianne Feinstein's writing letters to the Secretary of Interior and Secretary of Commerce saying, we need to change this. We need to give less water to the salmon this year. One thing that we could do is, if we decided to do that, we could auction it off. We could make people bid for how much they're going to pay for this changed allocation. And we could get money for preserving the salmon in future years or finding alternative sources or some way to mitigate the impacts on wildlife. There's a whole bunch of different innovations. Some of these are realistic politically, some of them aren't. So there's a dry year option. There's cities paying farmers not to plant this year. This is a big one that we should be doing right now. So the State Water Project can't deliver the minimum amount to the farmers. It's not worth them to plant, so cities should be able to buy out the right for the rest of the water. Fallowing is people could decide not to grow earlier on in the year and sell water for the coming year, and this is increasingly happening on the water markets, selling future use of water in coming years. Cities can buy land, so they can buy land. What if the city of Los Angeles went and bought up the cotton land in the Westlands Water District, and they could let somebody farm there in the short run, but over time get their water allocation. The other question is, could cities pay for conservation on the farm? So when people are doing flood irrigation, where they're just flooding fields, acre feet of water, covering the fields with water, could cities pay to reduce the amount in a measurable way, line their ditches or pay for more efficient irrigation systems and get the balance of water purchased? Water programs are super controversial. Some people say agriculture's, they're creating the value. There's another big thing is the people in the rural communities whose jobs depend on ag are not the people in the urban communities who have the super high demand for water. It's equity, distribution, justice. And there's these multiplier effects. So agriculture has a big multiplier on rural California. So a rich farmer who controls leases on lands could be selling his water to Los Angeles or not, but the rippling out on the jobs, on the long-term sustainability of rural communities is not going to be reflected in that person's choices. So I'm going to go back to showing more data, to telling more. Amazingly, here is the cost of water in California. Okay, here is where they're actually showing scarcity. Central Coast would be Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo area. South Coast, San Diego. Look at how much more the cost of water is out there. One thing is this water has to be, if it comes from the state water project, has to be pumped a lot more distance, and same with the Central Coast. And the pipe that gets to them is a lot smaller. There's a lot less water getting out there. These are the people, look at this price here, the low cost San Joaquin River. This is what we're talking about. These are people who have super low cost of water for agriculture. Sacramento area, super low cost as well. So this is coming out of Shasta Dam in Sacramento River. This is where they're growing rice between Sacramento and Redding going north. Colorado River area, this is federal water in the far southern part of the state. This is also super low, given the Colorado area could either also be going to Los Angeles or San Diego. So this is historical federal water. North Coast water is super cheap because water is a lot more abundant in the North Coast. But this is such a huge difference. These are people paying $10, $20 per acre feet. And if that water somehow through pipe was able to get to Santa Barbara, San Diego, it would be worth $600 per acre feet. It creates big differences in how people use water. So this is on similar crops. So this is pastures. This is the Colorado River water, which shouldn't be used for pastures at all. And they're using a ton of the water. This is out in the desert. The San Joaquin water, even more. And then where water is scarce in the Central Coast, they're using a lot less water per acre. Orchard crops, tree crops, these are the high value crops, using a ton more water in the Colorado River irrigated areas than even in the San Joaquin and the Central Coast. This is billions of dollars. The leading export from California is almonds. So these San Joaquin almond orchards, pomegranates, fruit orchards, cherry orchards, super high value. Tomato, another big crop, using twice as much water in the Colorado River basin as water that's grown along the Central Coast, even in the San Joaquin. So this Colorado River water, historic low price federal water, people are overusing it. They're using it at a really high intensity. So people do pay a whole bunch of the costs. The federal government pays a whole slice of the cost, but the users do pay a certain share of the cost.